রিভার্বটা কেটে দিন, রিভার্ব।
Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahi. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. We are continuing our discussion on this subject, the mother ideal in Hinduism. So, we discussed some aspects of this very important ideal in family life. So, based on some other scriptures in the last session, some Vedic scriptures. But there is no better way to deal with this subject than referring to a short poem called Matru Panchakam, which is just a small little poetical work of around 5 verses written by Shankaracharya. And this is considered to be the most beautiful, the most profound, though the most elaborate in the sense of its content and discussion of some of the profound subjects related to this idea. Matru Panchakam. So I shall give a little background of this work. Well, Shankaracharya was, as everyone knows, perhaps he is considered to be the greatest philosopher that India ever produced, and is considered to be one of the greatest names in world philosophy. Now, and also he is the exponent of a unique system of philosophy, which actually tells you that you don't have to perform rituals, you don't have to follow some ceremonies in order to reach the highest level of spiritual enlightenment. You just do your duty properly, or just live a good life, or just practice the highest devotion, which at the highest level is not different from the highest philosophy. He was the one who actually, for the first time, made the statement that the highest and noblest way of worshipping God in the temple and the highest philosophical spiritual evolution are the same. Highest jnanam and highest bhakti are the same. That's a very profound statement which Shankaracharya made in the Gita, especially in the commentary on the verse. Those of you can remember the 11th verse of the 13th chapter. Maicha ananya yogena bhakti ravibijarini vivikta desha sevitvam manabhirjana samsadi. It's a well-known verse which is actually a definition of unwavering devotion, the most profound devotion to God. And he says it is the same as the highest jnanam. So he says, na vyabhijarana shila, vyabhijarini, shuddha, nirmala, ananya yogenam bhakti, etc. All these are the different statements he makes while defining the most profound and the most unwavering devotion to God. And then he says, sacha jnanam, this is the highest Advaitic experience also. That person who wrote the most profound and the most complicated philosophical dialectical works in Sanskrit language, which Swami Vivekananda brought to the West in 19th century and expounded in English language. That philosopher was also the kindest and most compassionate son the world has ever seen. And even before he took to the life of a mendicant, he gave a promise to his mother, and then his mother, of course, didn't. In fact, this subject comes in discussion in this particular poetical book, which I'm going to discuss right now. So he gave a promise to his mother that whenever she wanted to meet him, whenever the thought of a desire to meet him flashes in her mind, he will appear before her in her deathbed. It's a promise which he kept. And he was perhaps 20 years old when suddenly the thought arose in his mind that his mother was thinking of him and she was approaching her last breath. She was approaching the death. He was perhaps about 1800 miles away from his native place, somewhere in Benares, Kashi. It's maybe 2000 miles perhaps. And he went to her and appeared before her dying mother. That's the scene. At that moment, he wrote some very interesting verses. He didn't write, in fact, these verses flashed in his mind. These ideas flashed in his mind in the form of a beautiful poem. That's what we are going to discuss today. Now, the verse begins like this. He says, Astam tavadiyam prasudi samaye durvara shulavyatha nairuchyam tanuchoshanam maramayi shayyasya samvatsari ekasyabi garbhabhara bharana krayasasya yasyakshamo dadam niskriti munnatopi tanayastasya jananne namaha. It's a very interesting one. So how it ends is, I bow down to my mother. That's the last statement. And then he is talking about his mother, or talking about any mother in the world. So when you listen to this exposition, you will understand the sweetness, the compassion, the joy, which all get mixed together when a son thinks of his affectionate mother. And also it has some value in modern times. Of course, I don't mean to say that all these ideas can be or should be practiced in this high-tech age, in this IT age, in 21st century, whether it is possible or desirable or even imaginable for us living in these distant times to even to think of practicing those values in this age, the transactional age, I mean the age of human relations defined in terms of business transactions. So still, some of those values which preserved, which lay foundation to the basic elements of human relations, in an age long before long before the Christian era began. In fact, the idea originated in the Vedic times. I referred to this in my previous class. It comes in the Krishna Yajurveda, which in a way perhaps is almost 3000 or 4000 BC, maybe 6000 years ago. In that book, there is a convocation address, a teacher addressing a group of students who have finished their education, going back, returning to their home, to start their life, to marry and become husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, playing different roles in social and family contexts. The first instruction, directly focusing on the values of family life, the sanctity and sacredness of human relations in the family structure is Matradeva Bhava. Means let your mother be as honorable, as respectable, as revered as God Himself. This is the prayer. This is the instruction given by a teacher, which comes at the beginning of the convocation address. It is from Krishna Yajurveda, the Taittiriya Upanishad. That idea is now that is being expounded in a graphic language by the greatest name in Indian philosophy, one of the greatest saints of all times, who lived in the 8th century. That means roughly around 5,000 years later after the early Vedic age. And there he says, let us leave alone the pain, the sufferings that the mother undergoes at the time of giving birth. Let us leave, let's not worry about it, let us not think about it. See, astam tavadiyam. See, asta means leave alone, don't bother. But there is something else. Iyam prasudi samaye durvara shulavyatha means at the time of giving birth to a child, the pain and the sufferings that the mother undergoes, let us forget that. That we better don't mention now. Then he says, Nairuchyam tanuchoshanam malamayi sayyasa samvatsari. It has something to do with what a mother does and has to do in connection with giving birth to a child and bringing up the child. So he says Nairuchya means, well, she won't have much of a taste at the time of bearing the child. And then body becomes weak. Remember, this is a time, this is an age that this being referred to. Long before modern medical science emerged, long before modern medical aids became available, but says a mother live along the pain and sufferings that are inevitable, which are unavoidable. Durvara means actually unavoidable, inescapable, which is part of a mother giving birth to a child. So we cannot even think about it, we cannot even speak about it. So that is why astam tavat, let's leave that alone. But still nairuchya means having no taste for food and not being able to eat food properly. Maybe in those days, we are referring to 8th century, the time when this poem was written. And then Malamayi Shayyach Samvatsari. After giving birth to the child lives, stays and sleeps with the mother. At that time, the child goes through all the needs of every human being. So the mother had to stay maybe in a bed that is dirty, in a bed that is become dirty because the child has to stay. That's the idea behind it, to think of those times. So Shankaracharya is actually just giving a brief reference to the pains and sacrifices that every mother has to undergo while giving birth to a child, while bringing up the child, which are unavoidable, which she cannot escape from. That is Durvara Shula means, Durvara Shula Vyatha means. And then Ekasya Bijat Na Garbha Bharana Kleshasya Yasya Kshamo. Then he says, okay, now a mother goes through all these sufferings, problems, sacrifices, pains, and so on. Then he says, Na dadum diskriti munnatopi tanayastasya jananne namaha. What it means is, even the most exalted person cannot really pay back to his mother a fraction of what she has done for him. That is the force of the statement in the 3rd and 4th verse. It says, Ekasya bina garbha bhara bharana kleshasya yasya akshama. Nakshamaha means he is incompetent. Even unnatopi tanayaha means maybe an Einstein in physics, an Aristotle in philosophy, or maybe a Shakespeare in literature. They may be exalted, maybe the greatest CEO, the most highly paid businessman. So the unnatopi tanayaha, he may be exalted, he may have a high profile, he may be the most accomplished person in this world in terms of empirical material achievements, but even he won't be able to pay back to his mother even for a fraction of the pains and sufferings that his mother may have undergone in bringing him up. That is the statement. Now it comes from, you have to remember, it comes from the greatest philosophical mind the world has ever seen. And a man who lived only for 32 years, who founded 10 monastic orders, to one of which Ramakrishna Mission also belongs, Vedanta Society also is part of one of these 10 monastic orders. Chinmaya Mission belongs to another monastic order, Saraswati, and so on. There is not one monastic order that ever was represented in America or Europe, coming from India. We did not belong to one of the 10 monastic orders Shankaracharya founded. And actually, in Sister Niveda's Web of Indian Life, she gives what can be called the most beautiful and profound condensation of the works of Shankaracharya, which he says, a boy who became a monk who was less than 7 years old, he was 7 years old when he became a monk, wrote all these complicated philosophical works within his 16th year, finished his study of the Vedas by 8th year, wrote all the poetry by 20th year, founded 10 monastic orders by 22nd year, traveled all over Indian subcontinent 4 times before his 28th year, and had hundreds of discussions in salt temples all over Indian subcontinent, including today's Afghanistan and Pakistan and Bangladesh. That man says, even I cannot pay back, with all my accomplishments, I cannot pay back even for a fraction of the sacrifices that my mother have undergone for me. This is the most important verse of the 4 verses. So Matru Panchaka means 5 verses honoring the mother ideal. So, and of course elsewhere the same author, he gives a wonderful etymological exposition of the mother ideal, because the word mother, the Mata is Sanskrit, is Mata, similar to English. Mata is Sanskrit. So Mang is the root, we call Dhatu, from which the word Matru Shabda comes. And Tru means Tranane, means protects, preserves, sustains. So Mang is the root which actually means measuring. Which also means knowing, understanding. When you measure something, you understand it. And Tru, that second part of the word, means protection, preservation. So the idea is, even the greatest son, the most accomplished son, can never even think of paying back for a fraction of the sacrifices that his mother undergoes. And then he says, Tasyai Janine Namaha. All that a son can do by way of remembering with gratitude the sacrifices and the affections that the mother had shown to him, the only thing he can do is Tasyai Janine Namaha. You just bow down your head in humility. That's the best, and that's the only way of paying back our debt to our mother. This is the most profound of the 5 verses. That's why he says, Ekasyabi na garbha bhara bharana kleshasya yasyakshamaha. Dadum nishkriti. Na dadum nishkriti means you cannot show gratitude, cannot give something in return. Na dadum shamaha means even unnatopi, even the most exalted tanaya means even the most exalted, even the most accomplished, even the most successful son cannot even think of paying back or returning to his mother for a fraction of the affections and sacrifices and toils that his mother had undergone for him. And the only way he can even try to do that is Tasyai Janini Namaha. My obeisance, I bow down to my mother. This is all that one can do towards one's mother. This is the first of the 5 verses. Now this verse continues. It narrates an incident in Shankaracharya's own life. The incident is this. Actually, he is referring to that in the 2nd verse. When he was a small boy, he was sent to a neighboring Vedic hermitage, a Vedic school, where he had to undergo studies in the Vedas. And as he was staying, in those days, they had to stay with the teacher, the guru, in his home. the guru considered teaching the Vedas to these young aspirants such a great spiritual work, like worship. So teaching the Vedas is, in a way, equals to participating in the preservation of the great Vedic culture. When you learn something from your teacher, when later when you teach the same, when you hand over the same, when you transmit the same learning to another student, then you are actually becoming a participant in this process of transmission of the eternal knowledge. So these students have to learn Vedas when they were very small, and they had to stay in the teacher's home. So at that time, an incident took place. That's what is being referred to in the second verse that we are going to discuss right now. So once Shankaracharya's mother in a dream saw his little child disguised or dressed as a young mendicant, as a monk. That was a heartbreaking dream for her. So because she had only one son, her husband passed away recently. So, and then after the son was given the Vanayana or initiation into studies, the Vedic studies, father passed away. The child was sent to a Vedic school, and she was undergoing Vedic training. And one night the mother saw in a dream that the son had become a monk. In some of the poetical works, there are altogether 9 poetical biographies of Shankaracharya. In some of these biographical writings, they say God was trying to show her what her son was destined to become. Anyway, so she was shocked, she was highly disturbed, and next day morning she went to the Guru's home where the son was studying the Vedas and cried loudly. And so at that time, the children around who were studying the Vedas in the same school, they also cried loudly. They didn't know what the lady was crying about, And then his guru consoled her, saying that, don't worry about it, it's only a dream. Anyway, that's the second verse. Gurukulam upasuptya swapnakale tu drushta yadi samujita vesham prarudo mam tamuchaihi gurukulamata sarvam prarudatte samaksham sapadi charanayoste madarastu pranamaha. So, Gurukulam upasrutya swapnakale tu drushta. I mean, one day the mother saw in a dream that her only son had become a monk. Now remember, this may be something very interesting. You should remember, unlike in Christian Dominican or Franciscan tradition, in the Middle Ages, where frequently parents celebrated when their son decided to join the Dominican or Franciscan order, frequently. But in Buddhism and Hinduism, the reaction of the parents will be totally different. That's because in traditional Buddhist and Hindu tradition, mendicants or monks or nuns, of course, should not have any connection, any interaction with their distant relatives, even with mother, except on some special occasions, like for example, when the mother was passing away or any such occasions. So the process of cutting asunder, the connection with the family was much more rigid and much strong. You can call it much more cruel in Buddhism and Hinduism compared to what it used to be in the Dominican and Franciscan orders. Because you find in the history of Saint Joseph, who was born in Cupertino, Italy. He was canonized maybe in 1730. So he is also sometimes called, he is a patron saint of pilots. Those of history of Franciscan saints, you may know. So when he was very reluctant to become a monk, but his mother practically dumped him in a Franciscan monastery. And he didn't want to go at the beginning. He wanted to be away, but his mother insisted on joining the Franciscan monastery. But after joining the monastery, he insisted on continuing there, even as he was taking care of the goats and cattle. Eventually he became a great saint, an exalted saint, Saint Joseph. So there is a little contrast between these two traditions in Abrahamic, in the Christian tradition, and Hindu and Buddhist tradition. So for many traditional parents in Buddhist and Hindu tradition, son becoming a monk is a terrible thing. Like you heard of the story of Buddha, Gautama going away from Lumbini, walking 1200 miles, going to Bodh Gaya, sitting under the tree, and with a strong resolution he sat there. Ihasane sushyudime sharidam tugasti mamsam chivilayam chayatu aprapisiddhim bhujanmadurlabham naivasanat kayamatashalishide. Before and without getting the highest enlightenment, I won't get up from the seat, let my body perish. With this strong resolution, Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, and eventually he became the great enlightened one, Gautama Buddha. But still his parents were terribly shocked when Gautama went away from the palace. So something like that happens here. Shankaracharya's mother had a dream that his son had become a monk. She saw him, a little child, wearing the ochre clothes of a monk, and next day morning he ran to the Vedic school and cried loudly. So you can find Prarudo mam tumuchaihi yadi samujida vesham prarudo mam tumuchaihi. I mean, saw her son in the garb of a monk, and she went and ran and cried and wept, and all the other Vedic students came along, and that's the incident that is referred to in the second verse. This is not so very important, but it's a reference to an incident. So Shankaracharya is thinking of all these incidents as he is looking at the mother, just as she had passed away. He had brought with him the water, sacred waters from Ganga, and spread the water over her. And then all these thoughts are flashing through his mind. Long ago, when I was a little child, I was in Vedic school, and you had a dream. In the dream you saw me, I became a monk. It was a great shock to you, like that. So these are the great things. Now remember, you may wonder why all these things are being discussed. How these things are relevant to our own times. This as an incident may not have any relevance to our own times, but the sweetness, the intimacy, the spirituality of that relationship between a mother and her son or daughter, as the context may be. Even the most exalted son or the most accomplished daughter cannot really pay back to her or his mother, even for a fraction of what she must have undergone. The hard work, the pains, the toils, the prayers, the disappointments, and sometimes the ingratitude, all these can happen. If we can keep this in mind, and some of these can perhaps bring back the exalted ideal of motherhood. And also, in the Vedantic feminist tradition, a woman becomes much more exalted when she becomes a mother. In fact, the motherhood ideal of a woman is much more spiritual and much more exalted one than the ideal of a woman as a wife. Because mother as the compassion, the love, the affection, all these combined together. That's why Shankaracharya now he has come back. He is the most accomplished philosopher and saint of India. And this man has come back to see his mother, breathing her last. And he had just sprinkled Ganga water on her dead body and prayed for her and did all the rituals. And then at that time, he's thinking about all that had happened in his spiritual relationship between him and his mother. The affections, the pain, the sufferings, the toils, the prayers which his mother had gone through, all for him, for his welfare. And is remembering all this with gratitude. That's the idea behind. This comes again in the third verse. Nadattam madaste maranasamaye toyemapiva suthavano deya maranadivase sardhavidina najapto madaste maranasamaye taragamanu akale samprapte mai kurudayam madaratulam. So, and then he says, this is for the general. I mean, normally when a son returns home to see his dying mother, the only thing that the son can do is, according to tradition, to sprinkle this holy water of Ganga on her dead body. But it's believed that when the water falls on the dead body of the mother, next life, her soul gets purified and her soul enjoys the union with God. She goes in exalted plane in her next life. This is the belief. So here, of course, he says, he has done all this, but he says, normally, many people can't do that. They don't remember that they may not be able to sprinkle holy Ganga water on the dead body, or they may not be able to do the rituals after the rituals in the name of their mother. They may not be in a position to do Taraga mantra, I mean, Omkara, sacred Vedic mantras in the years of their dying mother. Still, what happens, even if they can't do any of these, still, if they remember the affections and sufferings and prayers and toils the mother had undergone in their mind, that itself, and bow down their head in gratitude, that itself is enough. That's what Shankaracharya says, the third verse. And then the fourth verse is very interesting. Again, the son, this great philosopher, he's thinking of his childhood days. His mother used to fondle him using affectionate words that are all mentioned here in this verse. Muktamanistum nayanam mamedi rajedi jivedi chiram sudattum ityuktavatyastava vachimataha dadamyagam tandulameva shushkam. So this is an interesting thing, when the mother had passed away, there is after the ritual to be performed, and that ritual involves offering grains of rice in the name of the mother, uttering some mantras. Now, here the son is remembering some of the terms, some of the affectionate, endearing terms that his mother used to utter while taking care of the little child. That is mentioned, Muktamani, you are a diamond. You often find in American context, you may call honey. It could be, I believe, that's the American equivalent. So this is a very interesting reference to that. So here, the great philosopher is remembering in distant past, when I was a little baby, he used to use these terms, Muktaman. He used to use the word this diamond or jewel. And then Nayanam Mami, you are my eyes. And Rajedi, you are my king. Or Jivedi Chiram, you live long. With all these prayers. Chiram Jivedi Sudatvam, O son, you live long. So all these affectionate, endearing terms, which normally mothers use while taking care of the little child, little children, all these are now being remembered by Shankaracharya as he is looking at the dead body of his mother. Muktamonistum nayanam mamedi rajedi jivedi chiram sutattum ityuktavatiyaha tava vachi mata. So, in your words, in your utterances, I still can hear these words that you used to utter when you were taking care of me when I was a small little baby. They still ring in my ears. These are different ways of a great son remembering his great mother who had just passed away. So these words actually bring out that intimacy, the spiritual connection. I referred to this in my previous session, previous class. Well, the only human relationship in which you can find a spiritual connection is the relationship between a mother and her children. That's why in the Manusmriti it is said, Vadhyaya Deshacharya Acharya to Shatam Pida. Sahasranadhigam Piduhu Gauruvena Atirichite. It means the respect and reverence and the indebtedness means your sense of debt to others, so indebted to them. To a guest lecturer, a professor, father and mother. 4 human relations are referred to in this particular verse. Ubadhyaya Deshacharya. The respect and the honor that you should pay to your main teacher, the professor, the one who actually guides your entire education in university, is 10 times the respect that you may give to a guest lecturer. And then Acharya to Shatam Pida. The respect that you should give to your father is 100 times as much as the honor and respect that you give to your professor. And then Sahasrena Adhigam Pituhu means the respect that you give to your mother is 1000 times as much as the respect that you give to father. So the mother is the most exalted, the most respectable figure in a family, because the only relationship that can be called truly spiritual is the relationship between a mother and her children. That idea in the language of in the informal language of human relationship and its deep intimacy are brought out here in this 4th verse. And then this is again the 5th verse is just a remembrance. The great philosopher is remembering in his mind. Ambedi, tatedi, shivedi tasmin, prasudi kale, idavochamuchaihi, krishnedi govinda, hare mugundend, tyaho jananyi, rajito jaliste. It means, this is something interesting. Maybe we can remember that. The pains that a mother normally undergoes towards the time of giving birth to children, the pain that forced her to call on different names, different deities, Shiva, Vishnu and so on, mother, father and so on, that's mentioned here. You have to remember these verses were written in 8th century AD, not in modern times. So, in ancient times, maybe mothers used to cry out of pain, calling different names, God and different deities, and also crying, weeping in their own, calling out their own mother, father, and so on. So you have undergone all these. And so that's why the only way I can pay back a fraction of my debt to you is by Janani Namaste. I mean, just bowing down to you in total respect and humility. This is how the verse ends. Now, the relevance of this particular verse in modern times, say a few words about that. The point is, as I mentioned earlier, many of these ideas are important only in terms of some of the value systems that we are finding in modern times. Because when the intimacy, the spiritual interconnectedness, interrelatedness of different relationships in the family context, when that intimacy is disturbed, if that gets upset, what happens is the entire family structure will collapse. When I was discussing this subject some time ago, long ago, in different contexts, in a debate actually, somebody mentioned this, said, let's look at the history of America. Suppose these family connections, the family orientation, I mean 3 generations of the same family living under the same roof for hundreds of years, as frequently happens in ancient societies like India or China maybe. If that existed in America, America would not have expanded to this scale. But if you look at 19th century, you find the westward expansion. You can see in books written in 19th century, people from East Coast moving towards the west. They're getting down in St. Louis, hundreds of wagons be loaded with people and baggages moving towards the west. They get down in different places, and the parents will never see their children again. Children also won't see their parents again. So when everybody became disconnected with them from everybody else, it happened, this scattering of family members all over this continent. Without this, America would not have developed on the same scale as it happened today. It's a fact, no doubt about it. But still, when we have already reached a very high level of scientific and technological advancement and development, industrial expansion, progress, and so on, when we find around different disturbing trends, mostly originating from the one single problem we are facing today, the collapse of family systems, then we have to remember some of these values do have a relevance and importance to our own times, because families preserve our cultural inheritance, our culture, the sanctity, the sacredness, our belongingness. I mean, life is something much more than mere transactions in dollars. When the human relations within the family context become non-existent, when they disappear, there will be so many problems at so many different levels. When children want to be as far away from their parents, and parents want to be as far away from their children, each group pulling apart in opposite directions. The result is what is happening around all over the American continent, in schools and campuses, academic institutions. You can find 15-year-old children taking up assault rifles, doing terrible things. This all happened. If you go in search of the real cause of this, is because the institution of family has collapsed. That's the idea behind. So you often find, if you walk in the streets of San Francisco, you find the parents taking care of their small little babies. They, with great affection and care, they take a wonderful. But that ends when their children reach the 17th year. And then a different era begins in the lives of both. So I'm reminded frequently, I quote in many places, I'm reminded of an incident that happened here. One of our senior devotees used to be a professor in the university, now retired long ago. He says when he was visiting his friend, who was another professor, his friend told him that next month onwards, I will have one vacant room in my home because my son is turning 18th. So when the son or daughter turns his 18th year, along with the 18th year birthday present, a small bill also is put in front. It is a bill for rent for the next month onwards, I mean, so next month onwards, the son or daughter have to pay rent for staying in their own home. Now, when this happens, what happens, final result is the entire society collapses and many disturbing trends. On the one hand, it is true that we cannot really practice, in 21st century, we cannot practice the family values that existed, that originated in 6th millennium BC. Impossible. That's true. Because we cannot go back to we cannot walk backward in time. H.G. Wells' time machine still a fiction, not a reality. So we cannot travel backward in time. But still the point is, some of these great values that originated and preserved a great civilization long before Christ and long before the agrarian, the urban civilization ever came into existence. So some of those values do have a relevance for our times. Maybe not in their exact form, but in a different form. So if the fruits, if the blessings and gifts of science and technology can be combined with these great traditional values of sanctity and sacredness of the institution of family and of course the institution of marriage, if they can be combined together, what Swami Vivekananda said, the happy friction-free synthesis of the best of the East and best of the West, best of the Oriental with the best of the Occidental. That's what Swami Vivekananda spoke about more than 140 years ago. So many of these values that you find either in the Vedic text or even in this short little poem of Shankaracharya, do have a relevance for our own times. Here you have to remember, it is somebody like an Aristotle who writes in a most moving language about the intimacy of relationship between a mother and her son, little child. Such a beauty, the charm and the spiritual significance of this important work. It's very short, maybe it's the shortest work that this great writer wrote. He wrote more than 68 poetical works, of it is the shortest. But this is the only one that actually extols and elevates the relationship between a son and his mother to the state of a spiritual relationship. It's more sacred than the relationship between a man and his God. Because as I mentioned earlier, you find in the Mahabharata, you find in Bhagavata Purana, you find there are some stories where a man was praying to Krishna, who was in Dwaraka. But Krishna was not listening to him. He didn't care for it because he was not taking care of his own physically handicapped parents. And when another saint, Narada, asked Krishna, why don't you bless him, he said, he need not pray to me. Let him ask him to take care of his deaf mother and blind father. That's the instruction Krishna gave, you can find. He repeats the same instruction to Vidura also. In the Bhagavata Purana you find. Many such stories you find in Mahabharata, in the Bhagavata, and also many mythological books called Puranas and Upa-Puranas, where you can reach your highest, not just material or empirical prosperity, but spiritual enlightenment you can get by taking care of your own nearest and dearest, and your own nearest and dearest means mother and father. And even in this, the mother's name comes first because of the deep spiritual significance of the relationship between mother and her children. So this concludes our discussion on this subject. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Now we have announcements. There will be no lecture next Sunday because of a special program at our retreat in Olima. So next Sunday is 29th May. We have a 2-day retreat on 28th and 29th. On 28th we have a program of discussion among devotees of a very interesting subject. The subject is a survival kit for the spiritual journey. On 29th we have Memorial Day in Olima. So the next Sunday lecture will be on June the 4th. So please remember, there will be no Sunday lecture next Sunday, and the next Sunday lecture will be on June 4th. Childcare is provided during our Sunday lectures. On Sunday evenings there is an online class at 6 p.m. and the text for this online class is the foundational text of Indian philosophy. This class is sponsored by the Stanford Hindu Students Association. The Zoom and YouTube links are available on our website homepage as well as in the monthly email bulletin. So please remember, there will be no class on Sunday on 28th May also, because we have this Indian philosophy class. On Sundays there will be no class next Sunday. On Wednesday evenings we have Vespers with meditation at 7:30 p.m. in this auditorium. Special announcements. After this Wednesday's Vespers, there will be no lecture, classes or Vespers until Sunday, June the 4th, because of our annual Memorial Day retreat at Olima, which will be held on Sunday, May 28th, and Monday, Memorial Day, May 29th. The discussion topic at the retreat on Sunday for devotees will be a survival kit for the spiritual journey. On Monday, May 29th, our speakers will be Bobby Coleman, Richard Schimpf. They will speak on the subject, the future of Vedanta in America. And Swami Tattwamayananda will moderate and will contribute his observations. In the afternoon, there will be questions and answers. The program will begin at 10 a.m. and will end at 2:30 p.m. A light lunch will be served to those who RSVP by May 25th. Please remember, the Memorial Day event on 29th is based on RSVP. So please remember to do RSVP. You can see RSVP link in our homepage, website homepage. The last date for RSVP will be May 25th. So please RSVP on our website if you would like to attend, since seating will be limited due to the size of the tent. You and your friends are cordially invited to attend all of the services. As usual, after the lecture, there will be a question and answer session in Vivekananda Hall, and you are welcome. Normally, we used to have a very big program on Memorial Days till COVID. The last time we had that program was on 2019. So during the COVID years, we had to suspend that event. So this year we are trying to resume it as a kind of test dose, so to speak. So depending upon the response, we hope we will be able to bring it back to pre-COVID format by next year. Thank you. Namaskar.